Hey, and welcome to video number 6, which is brainstorming and planning your webinar. There is some heavy planning that is required to planning your webinar, but simply follow the template step by step and it should be pretty easy. The first step is brainstorming. You need to think about what type of general webinar you're going to have. Are you going to have a live webinar? Are you going to have a non-live webinar? Live meaning interactive, non-live meaning non-interactive, or a question and answer type general webinar. Then you want to think from that point, okay, let's say that I do want to have a live webinar, then what is the specific type of webinar that you're going to have? What is the specific type of goal that the webinar is going to achieve? So let's say, for example, that I want to create a live webinar on a pre-launch for one of my upcoming products. I haven't yet released the product yet, but I'll be releasing it maybe in, let's say, 1 month. And let's say that I have a live webinar that teaches people free material that is maybe included in the product, but there's a lot more meat inside of the content in the product itself. So that could be the goal of my specific webinars, the pre-launch webinar. Then ask yourself, what is your goal? Is it going to be a promotional? Is it going to be customer relationship? Is it going to be a demo of a product? And so forth. What is your goal? What are you trying to sell? Are you trying to sell a product? Are you trying to sell a webinar class? Are you trying to sell? What are you trying to sell? What is your, besides your goal, what are you trying to achieve? A stronger relationship with your customers and so forth. Now, if you're having a webinar and you're specifically having like a Q&A so that you can build a stronger relationship with your customers, then later down the road, you are indeed trying to sell something. So you definitely want to do some brainstorming in advance. What kind of webinar formula and pitch are you going to have? Webinar formula, remember there's several different types of webinar formulas. You could either do content, pitch, or we could do content and then pitch, or content and call to action, or content and so forth. And you can refer back to the web formula and tricks video for more of that information. And then what kind of pitch are you going to do? Are you going to, when you're selling something, how are you going to pitch it? What type of audience are you dealing with? Are you dealing with an audience that needs an extra push? Or are you dealing with an audience that doesn't really need a push? They just need the content, and from that content, they'll be willing to buy the product. Come up with possible speakers. Are you going to be the speaker? Are you going to be the expert? Or are you going to use the expert JV model where you do a JV and you find an expert on a certain topic? What are you going to do in terms of speakers? Then step 2, to create a highly effective webinar, you need to conduct a survey in advance. Now, the software that I use is called Instant Form Pro, and after this slide, I'm going to show you how to use this software. Very, very easy to use software and very, very powerful, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the inside of Instant Form Pro, and it's a software, it's a PHP software, so basically you can install this on your website, log in, and you'll see this. Now, this is very, very easy to use, and I'm going to show you how to use it. Plus, I'm going to show you how you can get the feedback that you need for your webinar. Now, as you can see here, I have about 4 surveys that I have completed for this specific section. Now, to create a new form, you just need to scroll over to the right. You're going to see create new form. So we're going to create a new form. And it says untitled form. So I'm going to title it by clicking this. And you see here, we're going to change the title. We're going to call it webinar. Pre-launch webinar, because that's our intention. learn more about my upcoming product launch. And get more specific, of course. Now, as you can see, there are several options. You can turn on password protection, which basically means that people need a password to log into your survey. You can turn on spam protection. You can limit one entry per user, and the way that works is it tracks the IP address and so forth. So we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to go ahead and create a survey. So what I want to do now is go to field properties, and we can add a field. So as you can see, this side here is where your form is going to be. There's several different options in terms of what you can add in terms of a different fields and so forth. You can add a single line text, paragraph text, multiple choice. You can put your name. Let's say I'm doing a webinar and I want to gather some research first. So I could put this over here. So you have the first name and last name. And then let's say that I want somebody to enter their email address, and I have maybe a paragraph text or multiple choice. So let's say, for example, that you want to get some feedback. You can add paragraph text. And you can change this, and you can change this paragraph. We could say something like feedback, your feedback. And let's say we want to add another field. Let's add a multiple choice. And as you can see, this is what I like about it. Let's say I want the multiple choice to be up at top and the feedback on the bottom. I can do that. Now I can delete it. I could add something else, like a way for people to upload files and so forth. And once you're done, just click on Save Web Form. And then you can go click on Manage Forms here. And you will see Pre-Launch Webinar here. And it's very easy to get entries. For example, let's say, we'll just click on this one here. If you click on entries, you will see the date it's created, their email address, their first name, and their information here. So you get feedback here. You can use that feedback to create a highly effective webinar. And as you can see, it's very, very easy, and you can export it as a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet. Now that you understand how to conduct a survey so that you can produce a highly effective webinar, let's move on to step 3. In step 3, you need to figure out what webinar software and service are you going to use. In this case, we're going to use GoToWebinar because that's very, very easy to use. In terms of pricing, the initial, you get a 30-day trial and you can check it out for yourself. But for the initial pricing, you get about 100 attendees that can come to your webinar. Now, of course, if you have more attendees, it's going to cost a little more money. But I would recommend that you have a live webinar first, and then use the method of replaying those webinars over and over again in the long run. Then you need to think about the registration process. Now, with GoToWebinar, not only can you create a webinar, but you can also set up some registration pages that are included with the GoToWebinar software and system. Now, with other webinars, you might not have a registration process, so that's just something that you need to keep in mind. Step 4 is content. Content, content, content. This is the biggest part of whether your webinar is going to succeed or fail, because this is the first thing that people are going to see. So you've got to ask, what is your content going to be about? What is your pitch? How are you going to pitch your content? And what you could do is you could start out with a big claim or a big story. So you've probably seen a lot of webinars that say, so-and-so makes, or so-and-so solves this big problem, and it's a big claim or a big story. And of course, people want to know more about how they were able to fix a certain problem, especially if they're dealing with that same problem as well. So the content is definitely important because if you remember the webinar formula, it goes content, pitch, content, pitch. So your content really is sort of like your headline of your sales letter. So think of it, the selling point, similar to that of your headline of your sales letter. It's the first thing people see, and it's the first thing that's going to grab people into your sales letter. In this case, it's the first thing that's going to grab people into your webinar. More on content, let's talk about content main points. I would suggest that when you create your webinar and you do it on a certain topic, that you do not cover everything. Do not cover everything. Cover just a few points, maybe 3 to 5 points that you can cover, and this will allow you to go deeper into each point. Now, if you do miss out on certain content, you can always create a new webinar. And what better way to create more and more webinars? So don't think that you have to put every single thing into one webinar. Otherwise, it'll just get really crammed and the people that are watching the video will be overwhelmed. And you don't want your viewers to be overwhelmed, because if they're overwhelmed, they're more likely not to buy your product and they'll just walk away. So you want to make sure that the goal is easily attainable. Then you need to think about, okay, how long is your webinar going to be? Is it going to be 60 minutes or is it going to be 90 minutes or more? Preferably, it needs to be a PowerPoint presentation, and the reason being is you don't want it to be too complicated. You want to be fairly simple. And like I said earlier, the more simple it is, the better, because you'll avoid crashing your webinar. Now, in terms of avoiding how to crash your webinar, I'll dive a little more in depth in the bonus videos, the bonus video number 1.